Years ago, a severely malnourished bobcat was discovered wandering near the edge of the Harpers' property, thin, exhausted, and barely able to stand. She looked like an animal running on the very last thread of strength. And somehow she had chosen this place to pause. What do you do when a wild predator shows up at your home? Not fierce, but fragile. As the Harpers reached for help, they found themselves at the start of a journey that would blur the line between wilderness and compassion. One wrong move could push this animal closer to death, or erase her wildness forever. But this wasn't a rescue story in the way most people imagine, because months later she returned, with something that would leave the family completely speechless. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. It was late October in rural North Carolina, the kind of evening where the sun drops fast and the air turns sharp enough to make a person pull their sleeves down without thinking. Leaves skittered across the gravel driveway like little brown animals of their own. Inside the house, the smell of pot roast hung warm and steady, and the faint sound of a football game murmured from the living room. Karen Harper was rinsing dishes at the sink when she saw movement through the window over the faucet. Something low to the ground, moving like a shadow that didn't belong to any dog she'd ever met. "Tom," she called, keeping her voice low like the thing outside could hear her through the glass. "Come here." Tom Harper, broad-shouldered and gray at the temples, came to the kitchen wiping his hands on a napkin. Their grandson, Eli, 12 years old and perpetually curious, followed a heartbeat later, already asking, "What is it?" Karen pointed. The yard light threw a dull cone over the grass, and at the edge of it was an animal, spotted, tuft-eared, unmistakably wild. "A bobcat," Tom said like he couldn't quite believe he was saying it. Eli pressed his forehead against the glass. "Whoa, that's huge." But it wasn't huge. That was the strange part. The bobcat looked big only because bobcats aren't supposed to be that close, not in the open, not under a yard light like a stray cat. In reality, she was too small for an adult female. Or maybe she wasn't small. Maybe she was hollow. Her ribs showed in faint ridges beneath her coat. Her legs seemed too thin to hold her up. She stood there with her head low, breathing like she'd run too far on an empty tank. Karen's stomach tightened. She'd grown up around animals. She knew the difference between a creature that was merely wary and one that was desperate. "Should we go out?" Eli asked. "No," Tom said immediately. His voice had that firm edge that meant the conversation was over. "Nobody goes out, not for this." Eli's shoulders slumped, offended in the way only a kid can be when the world won't let him be a hero in the exact way he pictured. Karen, though, didn't look away. The bobcat took a step and almost stumbled. Her tail flicked once, not in irritation but in effort, like even that movement cost her something. "She's starving," Karen whispered. Tom's jaw worked. Or sick. They stood there, the three of them, watching the wild animal sway slightly as if the earth beneath her was moving. For a long moment, she didn't even glance toward the house. Then her head lifted. Her eyes caught the kitchen light, and she looked directly at them. Not like a pet looks, not like affection. It was closer to calculation and something else. A question, maybe. A thin thread of hope that hurt to see. Karen's voice came out rough. "Tom, we can't just—" "I know," he said, softer now. "We won't. We'll do it right." He reached for his phone and stepped away from the window. Karen kept watching as he spoke to someone. First the county wildlife office, then a local rehabilitator whose number the dispatcher gave him. When he returned, his face looked older, pulled down by worry. "They said don't feed her," Tom told Karen and Eli. "Not without instructions. They said it can make things worse. They're going to call back with a rehabber who can advise us, maybe come out." Eli frowned. "How can feeding make it worse?" Karen put a hand on his shoulder. "When something's been starving for a long time, you can't just give it a big meal. That can actually shut things down." Eli blinked. "Seriously?" "Seriously," Tom said. "And if she's sick, you don't want her associating our porch with food. That's how wild animals end up getting hurt by people who don't mean well. Or they get hit by cars, or they get too bold around neighbors." Eli turned back to the window, his face pressed close again. "But what if she dies out there?" Karen didn't answer right away, because the honest answer was, she might. Outside, the Bobcat stood a little longer. Then, with a shudder that looked like it traveled from her shoulders down her spine, she turned and slipped into the darkness beyond the tree line. Karen let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. For the rest of dinner, nobody said much. Eli poked at his potatoes. Tom kept glancing toward the window like he expected her to reappear any second. That night, Karen lay awake listening to the wind rattle the last stubborn leaves. She pictured the Bobcat out there, thin as a blade, trying to find enough strength to hunt. In her mind's eye, the animal's eyes kept returning, steady and pleading for something the Harpers weren't allowed to give. At 6:12 the next morning, Tom shook Karen gently. "She's back." Karen threw on a cardigan and hurried to the window. There she was, closer this time, crouched near the far edge of the yard where the grass met the brush. Her ears were upright but tired. Her belly looked like it had caved in on itself. And she was watching the house again. Tom's phone rang just then, as if the timing had been planned. He answered, listened, nodded, and handed the phone to Karen. "This is Renee," a calm woman's voice said. "I'm a licensed wildlife rehabilitator in the county. Tom told me what you saw. I'm glad you called." Karen's throat tightened. "She's here again. I can see her." "Okay," Renee said, steady as an old nurse. "First, thank you for not going out there. Bobcats are generally not aggressive toward humans, but starvation and illness make any animal unpredictable. Second, we want to keep her wild. No talking to her, no approaching, no trying to comfort her." "I understand," Karen whispered. "Now," Renee continued, "because she's severely malnourished, we need to stabilize her. But we also need to avoid teaching her to come to people for food. Here's what I want you to do, and I'll come out today if I can. Do you have a spot on your property where you can place a safe container of water, far from the house, near the brush line? Something shallow so she can drink, nothing she can get stuck in." Karen looked at Tom. He was already nodding. "And food?" Karen asked, hating herself for how desperate she sounded. Renee paused. "I'm going to guide you, but I want you to promise you'll follow it exactly. No scraps, no milk, no cat kibble. If she's starved, the wrong thing can kill her." "I promise," Karen said. Renee instructed them on a very small amount of appropriate plain food, placed only in the brush line, never on the porch, never close to the house, always with distance, always with minimal human scent. It wasn't kindness for the family's sake. It was a medical triage plan meant to keep the animal alive long enough for a professional to evaluate her. Tom put on gloves, said nothing, and carried a shallow pan of water and the carefully measured food out to the tree line. He didn't stride. He moved like someone who knew he was borrowing space from something ancient. He placed the items down and returned without looking toward the bobcat. Eli watched from behind the curtain, his hands fisted in his hoodie pocket, tense like he wanted to sprint outside and do everything faster. When Tom came back in, the bobcat waited a full 10 minutes. Then she crept forward. Every step looked like it cost her. She drank first, long and steady, like her body had been dry for days. Then she sniffed the food, hesitated, and ate in small, careful bites. Karen felt tears threaten and wiped them away angrily. She told herself she wasn't crying because it was cute. There was nothing cute about hunger. She was crying because she couldn't fix it with a warm blanket and a bowl and a name. She was crying because love was not the tool this situation required. Restraint was. That day, Renee arrived in a truck with a wildlife logo on the door and a face that looked like she'd seen both miracles and tragedies on the same afternoon. She moved quietly, asked the Harpers questions, and observed the bobcat from a distance through binoculars. "She's a female," Renee said, "and she's in bad shape. But she's still alert. That's good. It means she's fighting." "What happened to her?" Eli asked before anyone could stop him. Renee glanced at him with a look that was kind but serious. "Could be a lot of things. Injury, disease, parasites. Could be she's an older cat, or she lost territory to another bobcat. Could be she was hit by a car and couldn't hunt properly. Sometimes it's just a rough season." Tom rubbed his palms together. "Can you take her?" Renee exhaled. "I can try, but she's still moving, she's still choosing. Trapping a bobcat is stressful and can hurt them if they're weak. We need to decide if she's likely to crash without intervention. If she starts to collapse, if she can't walk, if she's showing neurological signs, then yes, she needs to come in. If she's improving with minimal support, the best outcome is that she recovers without ever stepping into a cage." Karen swallowed hard. "So we wait. We watch," Renee corrected gently. "And we protect her wildness." For 2 weeks, the Harpers lived a strange kind of double life. They did their normal chores. Karen baked cornbread. Tom fixed a sagging fence post. Eli did homework and complained about it. But every day, morning and dusk, they checked from the window. The bobcat came, always quiet, always at the edge. She drank. She ate the small amounts Renee permitted. She never approached the house, never crossed into the open yard farther than she had to. She remained a shadow, a ghost with ears. And slowly, so slowly it almost didn't register until one morning Karen gasped. The bobcat's hips didn't look so sharp. Her coat started to lay flatter, her steps steadied. The dullness in her eyes began to change into something cleaner. She still looked wary, still looked wild, but she no longer looked like a candle about to gut her out. Renee checked in frequently. She adjusted the plan. She reminded them again and again. The goal is not to make a friend. The goal is to give a wild animal a chance to return to the wild. Then, one dawn, the bobcat didn't show up. Karen waited by the window until her coffee went cold. Tom checked the brush line and found the pan of water untouched. Eli took his backpack to the bus stop with his shoulders sagging like a grown man. "She's gone," Eli said when he came home. "Right?" Tom didn't answer immediately. He stood on the porch looking out at the woods. "That's what we wanted," he said finally, though his voice didn't quite match the words. That's success. Karen turned away so nobody would see her expression. The woods swallowed the days. Winter came. Frost glittered on the grass like powdered sugar. The Harpers stopped leaving water out once Renee told them it was time. The brush line returned to being only brush line, not a threshold between worlds. And life moved on, because that's what life does. Then March arrived with mud and redbuds blooming along the fence. One Saturday afternoon, Karen was hanging sheets on the line when she felt something prick along her skin, the sensation of being watched. She looked up. At the edge of the tree line, the bobcat stood again. Only this time she didn't look like death walking. She looked like what she truly was, muscle and fur and quiet authority. She held herself differently. Her head was higher, her eyes clearer. The wildness in her posture wasn't desperation now. It was certainty. Karen's heart thumped so hard it startled her. "Tom!" she called, not loud, just urgent. Tom stepped out, saw the bobcat, and froze. For a long moment, husband and wife stood shoulder to shoulder, staring. The bobcat took a few steps forward, stopped, and looked back over her shoulder into the brush. Then she looked at the Harpers again. And then, like something out of a story Karen would have dismissed as sentimental nonsense if she hadn't been standing there with her own eyes, the brush behind the bobcat trembled. A small head popped out. Tufted ears, too big for its skull. A second head. Then a third. 3 kittens wobbling on oversized paws stumbled into view behind their mother. Eli burst through the back door like a cannonball. What? Tom grabbed the back of his hoodie without thinking and pulled him to a stop. "No, you do not run at them." Eli went still, his eyes huge. "Babies," he whispered, like the word itself might break the moment. The mother bobcat kept her distance. She was close enough that they could see the spots on her coat and the soft flare of her whiskers. But she did not come toward the house. She didn't want their porch. She didn't want their hands. She wanted something else. She wanted the edge of the yard, neutral ground, a place she remembered as safe. Karen's hands trembled around the clothespins. Why is she bringing them here? Renee's voice echoed in Karen's memory. Sometimes animals remember where help existed. The kittens stumbled forward, sniffing at grass, pouncing clumsily at a leaf, then tumbling into each other. One tried to climb a small mound of dirt and fell over sideways, offended by gravity. Eli made a strangled sound like laughter trapped in his chest. And then, without warning, one kitten toddled too far into the open yard, farther from the tree line than the mother seemed to like. The mother bobcat's body tightened instantly. She moved with lightning speed, cutting between the kitten and the open space, her tail low. She didn't grab the kitten. She didn't need to. She simply blocked its path, her presence a wall. The kitten blinked up at her, as if realizing for the first time that the world was bigger than play. The mother bobcat looked back toward the Harpers. Not pleading, not begging, just acknowledging. Karen felt the ache hit hard and sudden, the heart-wrenching part of the story that people don't talk about. Because what she was witnessing wasn't a pet bringing her babies to meet Grandma and Grandpa. This was a wild mother doing one of the hardest jobs on earth, keeping her young alive in a world full of hunger, cars, traps, dogs, and careless humans. She was teaching them where a boundary existed, where danger did not rush in, where the rules had once been honored. Tom's voice came out low. "She's showing them." Karen nodded, swallowing past a lump. She's showing them a place where they don't have to panic. They did exactly what Renee would have wanted. They didn't move closer. They didn't speak loudly. They didn't leave food. They simply stood still and let the yard be what it was meant to be. A quiet, respectful space. The kittens played for maybe 10 minutes. Then the mother bobcat turned. She didn't call them. Bobcats don't summon their babies like dogs. She simply walked back toward the brush. One kitten followed immediately, then another, then the third after a moment of stubborn sniffing. The mother paused once at the tree line and looked back. Her gaze met Karen's. It was not affection the way people like to imagine. It was something older. A recognition carved out of hunger and survival, hammered into place by restraint instead of touch. Then she vanished into the woods, kittens trailing behind her like living commas at the end of a sentence. For days afterward, the Harpers lived in a kind of stunned reverence. The bobcat returned again. Never daily, never predictable. Sometimes she came at dawn, sometimes at dusk. Always with the kittens, always keeping them near the brush line, letting them explore just enough to learn, then guiding them back. Eli started sitting quietly on the back steps with a pair of binoculars, his elbows on his knees like a little old man. He didn't wave. He didn't whisper, "Here, kitty, kitty." He just watched, learning patience the way the bobcat taught her kittens, by boundaries. One evening, Karen found Eli on the porch after the bobcats had left. He was rubbing his eyes hard. "What's wrong?" she asked. He tried to shrug it off. "Nothing." Karen sat beside him and waited. Finally, he blurted, "I hate that she's wild." Karen's chest tightened. "Why?" "Because," Eli said, voice cracking, "because if she was ours, we could keep her safe, all the time. We could protect the babies. We could..." Tom stepped onto the porch behind them, having heard the last part. He sat on Eli's other side and put an arm around him. "That's the feeling that gets animals killed," Tom said softly. "Not harsh, honest. People mean well. They want to keep them. They want to love them. But love isn't always the same as what's right." Eli sniffed. "So what is right?" Karen looked out at the woods, dark and thick, full of things she couldn't control. "Right," she said, "is that she survived. And now she's teaching them to survive too." Tom nodded. "Right is that she can leave. Every time. That's the point." Eli's shoulders shook once. He wiped his face and stared at the empty yard. "It still hurts." Karen's voice went gentle. "It's supposed to. If it didn't hurt, it wouldn't matter." Spring rolled into early summer. The kittens grew taller, sleeker, less clumsy. Their play changed from tumbling into stalking. The mother bobcat brought them fewer times. When they did appear, the kittens stayed closer to the brush, their confidence shifting away from the yard and back into the woods where it belonged. The last time the Harpers saw them together, it was a quiet morning in late June. The sun was already warm, and cicadas had started their endless buzzing. The mother bobcat stepped out first, the young ones behind her. But now they were nearly her size, their ears still tufted, their bodies longer, their eyes sharper. They paused at the edge of the yard. The mother bobcat looked toward the house, toward the window where Karen stood with her hand pressed against the glass. For a moment, the world held still. Then the mother bobcat turned and the 3 young bobcats followed her into the woods. Not as babies anymore, but as wild creatures on the edge of their own lives. They never came back again. Not together anyway. Once, in late fall, Tom spotted a bobcat crossing the far back pasture at dusk. It paused, glanced toward the house for half a second, then slipped away. He never knew if it was her or one of her grown kittens, or a different bobcat entirely. But it didn't matter as much as Tom thought it would, because what the Harpers carried wasn't a pet story. It wasn't the fantasy of a wild animal choosing a couch and a collar. It was the truth. Hard, heart-wrenching, and finally heartwarming in the only way real rehabilitation ever is. A starving bobcat had come to the edge of their lives with nothing left. The family had wanted to scoop her up and save her with their hands, but they saved her with something far rarer: discipline, respect, and the willingness to love her without owning her. And in return, she had given them the closest thing to a thank you a wild animal can offer. She had returned whole. She had returned free. And she had brought her babies to the one place she remembered as safe, just long enough to teach them that humans, when they are at their best, can be part of the landscape without being the center of it. Years later, Karen would still look at the tree line sometimes and feel that old ache, the one that started in fear and ended in awe. She would still remember the hollow ribs, the trembling steps, the way the bobcat had looked into the kitchen window like she was asking a question she couldn't speak. And she would still feel the answer the family gave her, not in words, but in actions. You can be wild here. You can be safe here. And when you are ready, you can go.